Okay, let's gather. I want to make a brief announcement about what's happening this afternoon. Hoping many of you can stay and start to dig into this work. So we've just been collecting over the course of the weekend suggested workshops and discussion groups for this afternoon, and it's still mid-organizing. So it'll go from about 2 to 4. We'll have one set from 2 to 3, one set from 3 to 4. The locations will be in this room, upstairs and down, and in the alumni lounge. And after lunch, we'll have all the leaders of those workshops, or people that have offered to facilitate or lead the discussion, come up one by one and gather their flocks here on the stage. So, and then you'll break out to the locations. So that's just a heads up on that. And here's a list of what went up on those whiteboards. The first set here is workshops offered. I'll just give you a minute to run through that. And again, I think the leaders will have a little opportunity right after lunch to explain a little more about what their workshop is.
We'll leave these up over lunch so that people can look at them.
Okay, yeah, we'll figure out a way to get 3 slides up there simultaneously. Okay, so the second one, as you can see, that top one does not have a leader yet. So if you put that on the board, could you please see me at some point so I know who you are and make sure that it has a leader, or put it in the requested category? And the same with the second last, or the last 2 there. Oh, Doran is leading that. Great, okay. And then that's the last list. I'm not, also, if you put these on the board, particularly that third one, just to give us a little more idea of what it is, and I can probably add a little more to the description before we put it up. Okay, I think that's just a heads up. By the end of lunch, we'll have this list finalized. Thanks. So you're not using that, right?
I think so. I think I'm okay. Hi, I'm Larry Kopald. Little bit of housekeeping. Candace's amazing presentation and speech and prayer that she just gave us. Really, I'm sure it moved all of you the way it did me. She has asked that we give out a website if you want to learn more or get more engaged. If you have your pencils or pens ready, it is mniwater.org. And her email, if you want to contact her directly, is Candace, CANDACEDX @yahoo.com. Okay. This has been an astounding couple of days here. I'm sure you would all share that. And, you know, a lot of conversations have been going on in between the presentations. And I have one request to all the scientists here today, and if you could get your peers to do this, I think it would be great. From now on, if you're interviewed about anything having to do with the planet or climate change or anything like that, if you could begin with, well, I'm not a politician, but. Let's turn this around on them. Speaking of that, I was recently talking to a hardcore Republican, happened to be my father-in-law, and I was telling him what we're working on, And he's a bright guy, and I'm really trying to explain it to him, and he's not going there, and I'm talking about all the stuff that we've been learning about here in the past 2 days. And finally, he just looks at me, and he goes, "That is bull crap." And I said, "Exactly, and goat crap, and cow crap." And so this is how we have to get into disarming if we're going to take what we've been hearing about the last couple of days and turn it into action and really expand the influence of what we're doing. And that's really what this panel here is about. We're going to talk about activism. We're going to talk about how it works and how some specific players are doing it. And I want to introduce who we're going to hear from today, and they're each going to talk for, I guess, 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion. We have Vanessa Rule, who is co-director and lead organizer for Mothers Out Front and other local and state climate action groups. We have Antje Danielson, who is the director of the Tufts Institute for the Environment and a co-founder of Zipcar. We have Gary Rucinski, director of the Committee for a Green Economy and the Northeast coordinator of the Citizens Climate Lobby. Everybody has 2 jobs. And I guess I went out of order. Gary's at the end. And Eli, third over there, is the Massachusetts State Divestment organizer for the Better Future project and an EDM DJ, right? No, I added that. No, you don't have a second job. So, again, we're going to be talking about activism and really how we expand the influence of what we're doing here. And I'm going to ask Vanessa to kick it off. Yes? Okay.
Hi, everybody. How many of you are scientists? Can you raise your hand? And how many of you are activists? Is there a lot of overlap there? I hope so. So my name is Vanessa Rule. I'm the co-director and lead organizer of Mothers Out Front. I also co-founded Better Future Project in 350 Massachusetts. And I've been doing climate work since 2006, when I saw Inconvenient Truth. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself first. I grew up in France in a family of activists, and my mother lived in Paris, my grandmother in Brittany, which is on the coast in the countryside. And I really spent a lot of time in both places, one in an incredibly dense area, full of social capital, and then when I was at my grandmother's, she would just put me outside in the morning and say, "Don't come back till dinner." And I would just go out there and play all day. So I've always loved both environments, and I have tried to figure out how to reconcile those things. And I feel like where we are today, this personal story of mine is sort of what humanity is facing in some ways, right? That we're trying to figure out how we as human beings and the societies we've built reconnect with these larger systems. In my early 20s, I wanted to be a social worker because I felt the pain of the world, and worked with an organization called the Family Center in Somerville. And they did a lot of work in housing developments, and it was so painful. You just saw the cycle of poverty, drug use, and this was an organization that was built on systems thinking. And so it assumed that if you gave people resources, you had a resilient system and they would figure it out. But it really wasn't working that well. On the weekends, I would go to Cape Cod oftentimes, and one of my favorite places there is a salt marsh. And somehow I felt, part of something bigger, and I saw the resilience of nature, and that's one of the things that gave me hope. So that's sort of a base for me, and how, why what you all are doing and talking about today, I think, is huge. So in 2006, I saw Inconvenient Truth, and I freaked out. I knew about climate change. I didn't realize how bad it was. I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was to go find people to do something about it. And I joined a group called Somerville Climate Action. And for about 5 years, we did a lot of work in the community, doing energy efficiency, encouraging people to conserve, to put up renewables. But the science was coming out hard and fast, and it was clear that there's no way that by just doing this we'd get anywhere. So I got involved in organizing 350.org actions to start building a movement. And in October of 2010, 350 organized a day of action where people in communities all over the country would roll up their sleeves and show their leaders what it meant to roll up your sleeve and get to work. And at Somerville Climate Action, we were just feeling so frustrated by, the failure in Copenhagen and sort of how how slowly things were moving. And we said, we live in a city that's 70% paved over, and we're so sick of this, we're just going to take pickaxes and liberate the soil. And so we started. For our day of action, we depaved 2 backyards that both now have chickens and bees and fruit trees. And so that was a pretty unique thing. And one of the things I've been asked today is to talk about what I've learned over the years. And I think one of the things we did really well was we followed a lot of ecological rules in many ways. We, as a group, got to know each other really well. We created a community. We had a clear sense of our niche. And we worked together, and we created connections across the community. So it was really about reconnection. Again, not fast enough. So in 2009, I find myself in the middle of the night on Boston Common, waiting for a citation from the police department, standing with Bill Buchanan and Jim Hansen and 150 students who had who are protesting having to sleep in dorms powered by dirty energy and have pitched tents to protest that. And in the morning, they walk into the State House and lobby their state reps to say, we need Massachusetts to meet all of its electricity needs with renewable energy by 2020. And the grown-ups, by the way, thought we were insane. I mean, there were a few grown-ups there. But it was all students. So I was introduced to movement building through that. And got to see what you can do in over a short period of time. These students, had managed in 3 months to get 150 students to sleep out every single night for 7 weeks, and once a week at Boston Common, and to learn how to lobby their reps. And they managed to get their bill introduced, and I'm not going to get into what else they did, but they were successful. So anyways, I lost my connection to nature in doing that work because I've been building, now I'm with Mothers Out Front. We're focused on making Massachusetts the first state in the country to meet all of its new energy needs with clean, renewable energy and build no more fossil fuel infrastructure. But I've had a really hard time reconciling the work that I did with Somerville Climate Action and depaving and sort of where my heart is in many ways with the climate movement, because the climate movement is really steeped in anthropocentric solutions. And so I think one of the reasons I was asked to come here today was to say, how do you bridge those two things? And I think it is the way we did with Somerville Climate Action. It's about building relationships. It's about really understanding the people you're working with. So it's not about pushing your answer on other people. It's about getting to know them and having a conversation. It's about building community. It's not about just sharing facts. It's about telling stories. And it's about dreaming big, right? And getting a lot more people involved. So that's what I have to say.
Hi, I have to figure out how to get my slides up here. Hang on a second. While this is happening, I can say a few things. The first thing that I want to say is that it's really hard to speak after all the speakers from this morning, and I just heard so many things that I would like to say, and maybe I'm repeating those, but one of the things that Vanessa has just said has sort of guided me for the last almost 20 years now, and that is we're not moving fast enough. And it's a great frustration for me. So I have a couple of disclaimers. I'm not a politician. I'm also a backyard gardener, not quite yet a carbon farmer, I think, and I don't throw my dandelions out. This is a picture of my backyard in 2013, and actually last year in 2014, that entire area was covered in dandelions, and a few months later it looks like this. Pretty untidy, but I got a feeling that that's quite common amongst us farmers. The third thing that I would like to shoot ahead is that I'm also a scientist. And as a scientist, I think I have a very distinct way of thinking. I really often need proof to move forward on a certain path. And I want to say this ahead of time because I think everything that was said here in the last 2 days is incredibly important. And in my remarks, I don't want to give you the impression that I at all want to say that we shouldn't do these things. We should absolutely do everything that has been said here in the last 2 days. However, as a scientist, I think in a certain way. And as a earth scientist, and specifically, I'm thinking in terms of systems, earth systems mostly. And this graph on the right-hand side was developed by Rockström and his colleagues. And it shows sort of the limits of our planets and how far we have already infringed on those limits. And it shows you a couple of segments, the atmosphere, climate change, ocean acidification, many of the things that Bill has already mentioned. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that those systems are actually all interdependent, and that one change in one will have effects in the other. And when I think about those systems, I think of them as support systems for human well-being. And I call them the level 1 support. The natural systems are our level 1 support. And as you can see on the left in the writing, I actually include human ingenuity and the human capacity to be healthy into that roster of natural support, because I think we belong, we are part of the ecosystems, and so we need to be in there too. The second graph that I would like to put up here is one of my favorite graphs at all. It's by Kate Raworth of Oxfam. It's called colloquially the donut. And it shows the outer rim of the donut are the planetary limits, and then the inner rim of the donut are really what I call the human systems. Those are my level 2 support. Human systems like education, economics, law, art, medicine, agriculture, you get it. And Kate Raworth says that if we are below a certain level with those human systems, we are below the social foundation. And only if we are above the social foundation and the environmental limits, we are in the safe and just space for humanity. So our human well-being really relies on us being within the donut and not inside or outside of it. So the topic of this conference is, can biological carbon sequestration reverse global warming? And here comes my scientific doubt in, and I go like, well, can we? Because it all depends on the nice analogy that Bill showed us this morning, the bathtub, what are the fluxes in and what is the drainage? A lot of talk today was about, or in the last 3 days, was about grass-fed beef. I just wanted to throw that in there. So I think humans have a great capacity for perverting the natural systems. So here's the bathtub analyses. Can biological carbon sequestration reverse global warming? Before humans, Earth was regulating itself. So before the Anthropocene, Earth was regulating itself and keeping our atmospheric concentrations of those gases quite nicely and balanced. We humans upset that balance by putting in fossil fuels. So we turned on, we made the input bigger, we turned on the tap, and we are also destroying the sinks, so we're plugging up the drains. So when we want to do something about climate change, we need to close the tap, and unplug the drains. We need to do both. And I think I just want to repeat that because we need, in addition to all the things that we said in the last 2 days, we also have to do carbon emissions mitigation. We have to get rid of fossil fuel burning and so forth. So then, as scientists, again, I have the question, well, what are our emissions and how does that compare to the capacity or the potential of systems to sequester, and then on what timescales can we do this? And just by surveying the literature in the last few days, this is mostly EPA, IPCC numbers. So the global input seems to be in the order of 12.5 gigatons per year. Bill, if that's wrong, that's just what I was gleaning from the literature. And then again, and the biosequestration potential, as it is cited in the literature, is around 3 gigatons per year. And so clearly we have an input problem. And again, we need to deal with our input before we can get too optimistic about drawing out the CO2, drawing out CO2 through biological systems. Bill talked about this, maybe I don't have to talk about it too much, but what I wanted to show you, this is the Sakharov wedges game, and up here, those two wedges are the biological systems that we've been talking about. And I'm going away from this conference thinking that we probably underestimated the biological capacity to draw CO2 out. So then it comes to me, is all about the time frame. So how quickly can we do this? How quickly can we first of all, how quickly can we get to zero emissions? That's a very important question. And then after that, how quickly can we lower the atmospheric concentrations that we've already created? And I'm not really 100% sure on this topic, because that really depends on our actions, right? It depends on our activism, on how much we can mobilize our fellow humans and how quickly we can change systems. So that brings me to my last point, because as an entrepreneur, so I'm both a scientist and an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, these are really the hallmarks of how you get the biggest bang for your buck. We thought a lot about this when we started Zipcar. We started off thinking, oh, car sharing is a nice thing. And then we were going, well, but how can we really make a difference through car sharing? And the answer to that was, well, we have to ramp this company up as quickly as possible, so as many people as possible do car sharing and reduce carbon emissions by sharing their cars and driving less. And only if this becomes a really, really, really large company, we're creating an impact here. So the hallmarks for big impact to me are have a market value, so create some kind of economic value that grabs people's attention. Don't forget the community value, and I think Precious really pointed that out, that you cannot change people's behavior if they don't get anything out of it. So the community value is really, really important. Make sure that you don't talk about the first two only, but that you have resource conservation in mind. And then the third point is build it up to scale. Make sure that whatever you do is scalable, and build it up to scale as quickly as possible, and that gives you high impact. Thanks.
Is this on? Okay. Hi, I'm Eli Gerzon. I'm the state divestment organizer at Better Future Project, and mainly work with our network, the 350 Massachusetts network. And yeah, to start with a little bit about where I'm coming from, my parents met through the macrobiotic community, which is kind of like being vegan, only more uptight. And their view was really that this is how we're going to change the world. And I guess I realized that wasn't necessarily totally the case. It's had a positive impact, but that was sort of their theory of change, is the term that I've learned more recently. And for me, it was a very dramatic thing to learn about a new mode of education that was much more free. Jane Hammer just introduced us a second ago, and she, somebody I know from that community, and I really thought that would help us change the world. People having the freedom to learn in a more free way that could find out what's really going on and not sort of brainwashed by the mainstream educational system. And again, I was disappointed to find that not everybody in the community had the same sort of vision, and it didn't sort of directly lead to changing the world as much as I really saw that we needed to. And then I spent several years traveling, and that was something, again, part of the whole educational thing, and I thought that was going to change things, and it changed me. But it wasn't until a couple years ago I went to the 350 New England Convergence, and it was part of 350 Massachusetts and other groups. I'm pointing to Vanessa because she helped organize it, and as she said, helped found 350 Massachusetts and Better Future Project. And it was then that I really started to see, okay, organizing, building up power, being strategic, working together, this is how we're actually going to change things. And I worked on different things, and over the past year and a half, I've been working on state divestment. So we've got a pension fund. There's over $1 billion of that pension fund is invested in fossil fuel companies, right? So just as we've divested from apartheid and tobacco, and we were in fact the first state to do it, we can be the first state to do that, to divest from fossil fuels and stop supporting this industry. And there's been amazing progress with that campaign, and I've really seen the movement growing. And the way I frame it, and it's not sort of the main party line about divestment, but the way I frame it is that we're addicted to fossil fuels, right? We kind of throw that out. I think I've heard other people say it, but I really want to go into that metaphor a little more deeply. And what I mean is, like, we can't stop ourselves, right? And when you're addicted to something, what's the first step? Admitting you have a problem. Exactly. Acknowledge the problem. That's what divestment is to me, right? And so when we talk about sort of the mainstream climate movement and we talk about soil restoration, I do honestly think one of the main obstacles is just not being willing to really look at how serious this problem is. So I consider that is what divestment's contribution is. That if we truly admit that there's a serious problem here, then that things will fall into place. There'll be real challenges along the way, but that's our main obstacle. And so that's why I'm really excited to be working on it. I should say that all of the world traveling I did was mainly financed by my landscaping business. So I have some experience with this sort of thing, and like Vanessa was talking about, I really do feel the need to get my hands dirty and actually be working with soil and with plants and with life. And so that's part of what I love so much about soil restoration. Another big part is that I really see what's exciting about soil restoration is there's a lot of scientists and there's a lot of local people doing the work on the ground, as Candace and Precious talked about, and empowering people in a way that a lot of this sort of more wonky climate stuff or even science stuff, it can often be sort of ivory towers and state house visits and stuff. And so I think that we need to do that both for our personal soul, that's the way I would look at it, and also because we need to make sure that this change that we're creating, this movement, as I'm talking about, that it's not dominated by white people, it's not dominated by patriarchy, it's not dominated by colonialism, it's not dominated by capitalism. Because I have been devoting my life to this. And if we just get some carbon into the soil, if we just stop using fossil fuels and nothing else changes, I'm not going to be satisfied. And also, in addition, I think that we can't actually do the type of massive change that we want to do if it's just going to be dominated by the things that have been dominating our society so far. And so, again, yeah, like Vanessa said, I was asked to try to talk about how connecting with the mainstream climate movement and with the soil restoration, holistic management. I think a big part of it is speaking the language. So if you want the climate movement to get excited about soil restoration, got to speak the same language, got to meet them where they're at, and it has to be about movement building. The basic line we often talk about is, we're never going to have as much money as the fossil fuel industry. We're never going to have as much money as Monsanto. We're never going to have as much money as big, their agricultural complex. Where the way we're going to win, the way we're going to have more power is, yes, with the scientific facts, but we've clearly seen that doesn't always do it. The way we're going to win is building up people power, all right? We already have the science on our side. We're never going to have the money, enough money on our side, but we need to build up people power. So in connecting with the mainstream climate movement, I think that's what we really need to emphasize, is how are we going to build this up as a people-powered thing. So.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for hanging around this morning. First thing I want to say is, I don't know if many of my friends know this, but I have a big fear of public speaking. And one of the things that doesn't help is sitting at the end of a long line of speakers. Well, my anxiety builds up. But I just want to say, the question, why am I here? Why am I an activist? It came about because I was looking for a job, and I wanted a job in clean energy, and I wasn't finding one, and I asked people, why aren't there any jobs in this field? And they said, well, you're not going to see this field take off until there's a price on carbon. And that made a lot of sense to me. A couple months later, I found this organization called Citizens Climate Lobby, and what were they doing? They were trying to put a price on carbon. Overnight, I became an activist. I didn't have any intention of being an activist. I was actually just a job seeker and a dad and a husband, and that's really all I wanted to do. But after becoming concerned about climate change and then identifying this one solution, putting a price on carbon, as something that I could get involved in, I just automatically overnight became what's been called an activist. I call myself an activist. I call myself a climate advocate. But actually, I think those terms are false, and I think what I really am is just a sort of a hyperactive citizen. And I am that because I'm enabled by a very disciplined and focused organization called Citizens Climate Lobby, or CCL. And CCL has a mission, which is to generate the political will for a sustainable climate. And they do that by enabling individuals to have breakthroughs in their exercise of personal and political power. And those aren't just, I'm not just using those words, I'm not just saying those are on the website, that's what they do. I mean, I met in June face-to-face with 3 of the Massachusetts congressional delegation down in Washington. And if you don't think that that's empowering, well, you should try it sometime. What Citizens Climate Lobby is trying to do is they're trying to mobilize the free market in the fight against climate change. They're trying to mobilize the free market to shut off that tap. And it's based on the premise that if you want, as economists will tell you, if you want less of something, tax it. Because when you tax it, the price will go up and people will seek alternatives. So Citizens Climate Lobby, I said they're focused on a single policy solution right now. It's called carbon fee and dividend. We would put a gradually increasing fee on carbon at the source, and we would return 100% of proceeds to households on a flat basis. The fee would go up year after year until the tap reaches sustainable levels. And returning the proceeds to all households protects households against rising costs of energy while we go through this transformation to a clean energy economy motivated by the increase in fossil fuel, the increase in energy prices, which of course motivates a lot of entrepreneurship and investment in renewables, conservation, and efficiency. So the price signal discourages the use of fossil fuels, and it also promotes the development and adoption of what we want, which is conservation, efficiency, and renewables. So because of my background, and I've been doing this now for 4 years, I see the challenge of promoting healthy soils through these kinds of economic and legislative lenses, okay? So there's the economic part, which is putting the price on carbon, and the legislative part, which is becoming a hyperactive citizen and going down to Washington and lobbying your representatives face to face. And so as I've been thinking about the problem of how do you move this movement from this auditorium out into the world and actually have an impact. And again, I would come back to, if you want less of something, tax it. Well, we know that inputs degrade soils. And so what I was thinking about was, well, we could take a lesson from carbon fee and dividend. We could tax the inputs. If we tax the inputs, fertilizer, herbicides, insecticides, that's going to drive the cost of, thank you, conventional agriculture, and people are going to start to look for ways to get away from that. And you know what? You've already got all of the technologies that they need to find alternatives, reduce their use of inputs, and move to regenerative agriculture overall. And so, so I'm going to coin a new phrase here. It's called input fee and dividend. You put a gradually increasing fee on fertilizer, herbicides, insecticides. Maybe people know of other detrimental practices, products, services that are being used by big ag. And there'll be a question about what you do with the money. Personally, I'd return it to households so that they can afford the food that they need to buy during this transition to a permaculture-based food system. So I propose, I love proposing these little things, I do it almost every day. I propose the formation of a new organization called the Citizens Regenerative Agriculture Lobby, or CRAL, CRAL. Unlike CCL, its mission would be building the political will for reversing climate change rather than just having a sustainable climate. They would enable personal breakthroughs in exercise of political and personal power. And they would have one and only one policy proposal, and it would be input fee and dividend. And they would work relentlessly until that law was passed nationwide, perhaps starting in the states. They would be a nationwide organization. They'd be in every congressional district. They would lobby their representatives and build personal relationships with their representatives and their aides. And they would work through the media and just doing general outreach and also developing their own capacity to really excel at this type of hyperactive citizenship. I do believe that the free market has a key role to play here if we can figure out how to mobilize it in the drive towards this type of world that we want. I also think that the political process is a piece of this, and I think as I've been coming here over the last 48 hours, one thing that's kind of occurred to me is that not only do we have desertification in the natural world, but we also have desertification in the political world. We have inputs like money, which is distorting everything. We know that the extremes are dominating in the parties. In some cases, I feel more in one than the other. And the middle has become desertified. And everybody's alienated. Everybody feels powerless as individuals. But I think that this political desertification is reversible. I think that using the model of Citizens Climate Lobby and the way that they empower individuals is one way of doing that. And so just in closing, I encourage you to trust in the potential of the free market to produce solutions. It's done it before. I don't have my cell phone handy, but I usually at this point say, this is the most elegant device on the face of the planet, and the government had some hand in it way back at the beginning for fundamental R&D around cellular communications or something. But other than that, the free market produced all of those devices that we rely on, and it can do it again. And I also encourage you to trust in your own potential to steer your government, the people who work for you, in the right direction around this issue. Thank you.
No? Okay, there we go. Okay. Thank you. I think it's really easy to see why they're representing activism up here. One of the phrases that we hear a lot is we have to stop preaching to the choir. And I want to challenge that for a little bit and lead into a question. I think it's the right words. I think it's the wrong emphasis. I think we have to stop preaching to the choir. I think we have to activate the choir. And I think if you look at even the environmental movement, 75% of the choir doesn't do a thing. You know, maybe they throw a newspaper in a recycling bin, and maybe they sign a petition online and forward it. That's a slacktivist, not an activist. And if we can start activating the choir who's already there, that's going to give us more of that momentum that we've talked about a lot this year. And I want to talk about this and how you guys think we get there. And I want to start by telling my own recent experience at trying to activate the choir. I was in a room of people in Los Angeles, and they're the choir. They're big enviros. And I was telling them about the subject of this conference and really the science and what's going on and how it truly can solve a whole lot of our problems. And they were getting it, and they were, you know, they thought it was really cool. And at one point, because I can get a little passionate, I said, guys, we're talking about curing cancer here. And they all went, whoa, whoa, we can't talk like that. We got to get rid of the hyperbole. And I backed off very quickly, because I know I can get to that, turn it to 11 pretty quickly. So I backed off and calmed down. We talked about it. And after I got home, I went online, and just for the heck of it, I went to the World Health Organization, I went to the UN, and I asked how many people each year globally are diagnosed with cancer. The number is 14 million. Now, I don't want to minimize cancer, but 14 million versus every living thing on Earth, including the Gaia of the Earth. And I'm going, was it really hyperbole? But the learning for me was, in preaching to the choir, if you will, was that we have to really figure out where is that balance? Where is that level that gets them excited, gets them off their butt to do something, but gives them the tools and the belief that they think that they can take forward and talk to the next person and the next person. So I'd love to hear you guys talk about, where do you find that sweet spot in a message when you're talking to people? You want to get them excited. On the other hand, you want to get them to believe what you're talking about. So anybody, go ahead.
So
10 minutes.
So the last 21 months I've been working with people beyond the choir, with mothers. 3/4 of the people that we're working with have not been involved in the climate fight before, and a lot of them haven't been activists even. But one of the things we've learned about how you move people who really, don't want to move is that, first of all, you need to meet them where they are, and so you need to create a really culturally sensitive context. So a lot of our moms wouldn't come to a 350 Massachusetts meeting because they just don't identify. So we go to their homes, we have house parties, they invite their friends, they work with their networks. And then you create a sense of urgency and hope. So we know that if people don't feel hope, it doesn't matter how urgent the problem is, they're going to not do anything. So that's where movement building, I think, is really powerful. You share the science, you talk about, McKibben's 3 numbers of, how much the fossil fuel industry is planning to burn, what's our carbon budget, and what we need to do to reconcile the two. And then you give them the solution, and you give them a chance to get involved, and you build a campaign, and you do grassroots organizing and say, go do this. And it's been really effective. I mean, we've engaged over 1,500 mothers. A huge percentage of them are calling for the end of fossil fuel infrastructure in Massachusetts, which is such an unappealing thing to think about.
So just to make one point, if I heard you right, you didn't go in through the door of 350 because it's a climate issue, and you went in through a health issue?
No, it's about their kids.
Okay.
Right. So we come in, we say, look, here's the situation. We talk about stories, right? We didn't go in just with the data. We said, when I facilitate a house party, I talk about who I am, why I'm here, or why it matters. I tell a story, and then get them to understand the power that they have. And in their case, they have the power to make climate change real by putting a face to climate change in a way that science just doesn't, because they can point to their kids. Those are reminders every day.
Great.
I guess you will find that each of us can say a lot about this. So I would say that we don't just have to activate the choir, but everyone who has a potential to sing. And this sort of brings to mind my son and his music teacher. My son is 14 years old and can't sing for the life of me. He has no pitch. He, is pretty bad. Yet his music teacher has activated him. And how has his music teacher done this? Well, he's an awkward middle schooler, and his music teacher provides him with a community. And instead of saying to him, you sing in the choir, which he can't, he says, you can hang out in the music room, and we talk about rock music. It doesn't have to be rock music that you make. And when we have a production, you will be the stage manager, and so forth. So I think transferring that to a global movement is getting back to what Precious said. You have to meet people where they are and meet their needs. You need to know what people need, and if they need better transportation, then you need to provide better transportation. If they need a community, you need to provide a community. If they need food because they're hungry, then you need to provide food, and you need to show that they won't have that if they don't believe in climate change and if they don't contribute to this.
Yeah, I just wanted to say briefly, I think a big part of it is, especially if you're talking about reaching out to other groups that are already activated on other issues, the best way to motivate them to get active on your issue is to get active on their issue. Show up to their rallies, show that you care about what they're working on, and like we keep saying, meet them where they are and find the common values there.
Yeah, I agree. Meet them where they are and give them a very positive message. And also, don't necessarily talk about what things might be like 100 years from now and how good they'll be, but actually how they can begin to see improvement even within a year, 2, 3, that connects with their lives.
Great. The dancing time card, okay. In the 5 minutes we have left, I'm going to ask each one of you a specific question. Starting with Antje. When we talk about activism up here, we've sort of all related it to the environmental world. You are a tremendous activist in the business world. As co-founder of Zipcar, you created a disruptive company that has the potential to really stimulate the shared economy, which there's some status quo folks that are probably not really thrilled with you right now. And I would love it if you could talk a little bit about what you've learned about being an activist against big powers that be in the business world.
Wow, that's, I've learned a lot. Well, the first thing that I've learned is that investors don't believe in you unless you have a proven track record. So it took us a very long time to find the right investors. Well, when I say, we built this company really fast. So when I say it took us a long time, it took us about a year. But we were two women. Neither of us had started a company before, and you know, investors would look at us and say, well, how do we know you can do this? And all we had to pitch against that was, we have conviction, we think that this is really, really important, and we will work as hard as we can to get this off the ground. So I think those are some of the ingredients that you need for whatever you want to do. I mean, just as Eli said, you pitch your life to do this. So you really have to invest your full attention into it if you want to achieve something big.
Great, thank you. Eli, divestment is really turning into an exceptionally powerful tool. I was recently with about 5 oil companies, and they're really pissed at this, I got to tell you. So
That is great to hear.
So congratulations. And when the Rockefeller Fund, whose money comes from oil, did it, that was a big statement. Who are you recommending, or has this even been really planned out, that universities or funds or foundations or whatever would divest from, that would affect the issue that we're talking about here, the food, the soil, the grasslands?
Yeah. Well, I mean, right at the top of my head, a lot of these fertilizers are synthetic fertilizers from fossil fuel companies, so there's a direct line of connection right there. It's certainly not, it's about the top 200 or so fossil fuel companies, so that wouldn't include, I suppose, some of these companies like Monsanto or whatever that we're battling against for the soil restoration. But I thought you were about to ask about who would you recommend we do invest in, because that's a question I get very often, like, okay, you're saying divest from these fossil fuel companies, but what should we do with that money? And so it's really been, whatever, it's fine. They can invest in whatever they want, just not fossil fuels. And I think that has a lot of power, but also I think that there's a lot of power, especially as far as building the movement and putting a positive spin on divestment, in using that money to invest in bigger things, so in better things.
So you're not looking at asking people to divest in a McDonald's or a General Foods or somebody like that?
No, divestment is about just fossil fuel companies. There's been other very successful divestment campaigns about tobacco, about apartheid, South Africa.
Right.
But
Okay, thank you. Gary, you talked about putting a price on inputs, which would be phenomenal. I think if we could get there. From an activist standpoint, how would you go about doing that, knowing that the likelihood, if we're to get there, would be sort of like what they're doing on tax breaks with the fossil fuel industry? Tax breaks are fine for renewables if you give them to everybody, or if you're going to take ours away, equal the playing field and take them away from everybody. So what happens if they say, okay, we're going to tax fertilizer, but that includes natural fertilizers, organic fertilizers as well? How do you prevent, can you prevent that lumping in to perhaps slow down the process in the side that we want to grow?
Well, we have the same issue on the fossil fuel side, because fossil fuels get a lot of subsidies, and clean energy kind of sporadically gets a lot of subsidies. And actually, so I think Citizens Climate Lobby, our position is, you know, if we can just fix this market failure and level the playing field, we don't think that clean energy needs subsidies to compete in that environment. And I think that the situation would probably be the same thing on the agriculture side. I'm not enough of a agronomist to know about the relative merits of organic fertilizers. I don't know whether they have the same problems with runoff nitrogen getting into waterways and things like that. But if they do, then you shouldn't necessarily be giving them a free pass either. So I think that would have to be looked into. But I think just leveling the playing field, again, a lot of analogies between fossil fuels and what we've been talking about here. All of these inputs have negative externalities. Whenever we talk about fossil fuels, we're talking about the negative externalities. And we can't calculate exactly what the cost of those are so that we could embed them in the transactions. So therefore, we use a proxy, which is just a tax, and let it go up until our waterways run clean. And we're putting carbon in the ground.
Great, thank you. Vanessa, you talked at the beginning very eloquently about an inner conflict that you had when you started down the path and got into the different areas that you went. I'm curious, the people you're talking to, most of us have an inner conflict when there's an issue and otherwise we'd already be doing something. There is something that we're processing internally. How do you, when you talk to the moms or you talk to groups, how do you go about helping them identify, overcome, overtly or covertly, a conflict they may be having internally?
Move them into action and get them working with other people. I mean, I think one of the things, going back to what Eli said about we need to build people power, and we need to build a really powerful grassroots movement. I'm not an activist, I'm an organizer. And it's about engaging with others to understand that collectively we can do things that we can't do alone. And when you start engaging together, just like ecosystems, you go through a process of transformation and you move up that what people call the ladder of engagement. So it's really through interaction and interconnectedness, interconnection. And I think, going back to how do you connect biodiversity and this to the traditional climate solutions that are being put forth right now is we need to get people just building relationships with each other and talking to each other and learning from each other.
So community.
Community.
Back to community.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Okay, last comment, I just want to say everybody in this room is an activist. So it's not us up here, it's by showing up here today, by doing the work we do in the lab, in the farm, in the legal courts, whatever it is, it really doesn't matter. And I just want to thank everybody here and everybody here, and I guess we're done.